Hey everyone, it's Natalie Bencivenga and welcome to Facts Over Fear Health News Edition. I'm here with Dr. Natalie Gentile, one of my besties and also one of our experts that we have on regularly here to talk all health news you need to know. How are you today, Dr. G?
I'm doing great, Natalie. We've got some great topics lined up.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And they're very varied. So we're going to talk about the MAHA revolt after the latest Monsanto verdict from SCOTUS, which should be really fascinating and upsetting. Then we're going to talk about violence against healthcare workers. Why is this happening? How does the distrust of the industry feed into this phenomena? And we're going to end on some news about menopause and what your ovaries are actually doing. People thought they were kind of like sort of duds after menopause, but now they're finding out there's some fascinating things happening in the body. So we're going to talk about all of this and more. But to kick things off, the Make America Healthy Again movement has become one of the most influential forces we know in conservative politics. But now many of its own supporters say that they are feeling betrayed. In a 7-2 decision, which is very concerning that 7-2, the United States Supreme Court sided with Monsanto, ruling that the company didn't have to warn consumers about an alleged cancer risk linked to its Roundup weed killer because federal law doesn't require such a label. Now, this decision came after the Trump administration backed Monsanto's legal arguments, leaving some MAHA activists scratching their heads and questioning whether the movement's priorities are taking a backseat to corporate interests. Gee, I wonder.
Yeah.
So what does this ruling really mean for consumers, for accountability, for physicians and public health, and the future of the MAHA movement? Dr. G, what I found interesting about this was we've been talking a lot about sort of public health initiatives here on this show for many months, and really how the MAHA movement, it's a loose movement. There's not too much of a concise philosophical or political ideology. There's a lot of different fragmented pieces to this sort of movement and group. So were you surprised that they were so upset over this ruling with Monsanto?
No, not surprised, but none of us want to say I told you so.
Don't we though?
But here's an instance
that was
where we will.
2020 for us.
But here's an instance where we will. So, okay, so I found this really fascinating because I'm seeing it on social media and, even people like Alex Clark. So Alex Clark, she has a massive, massive following, very MAHA driven, tons of, work around environmental, support and toxins and, public health in that realm. I can see an overlap. Now she goes off the deep end in so many ways that are concerning, but I saw her even say, we feel betrayed by Trump here. It's interesting because we're seeing this turn of people who were in support of Trump thinking that they were going to get support of MAHA. But in the end, like you said, what is MAHA in the first place? And if you don't have well-defined boundaries around what you are expecting and what your needs are going to be, you can't be surprised then when corporate interests win.
So this was an interesting quote to sort of dovetail off of what you're saying. A lot of MAHA voters are realizing, this is from The Hill, they've been snookered. They've been had by Republicans that had no intention of protecting their health. It's just a talking point they added, said David Murphy, founder of the United We Eat. And he was the finance director of Kennedy's presidential campaign. We're talking about RFK Jr. MAHA said the decision really could be a tipping point for MAHA voters who have historically been a loose collection of groups without a set political agenda. He even made a point to some may even actively vote Democrat after this. Now, what's interesting about this is before he joined the Trump administration as the head of HHS, as the secretary, Kennedy had spent years as an environmental lawyer crusading against I always mispronounce this, glyphosate. Now, that's what's in this weed killer, this Roundup weed killer. In 2018, he had even won a landmark case against Monsanto, representing a groundskeeper who alleged that Roundup contributed to his cancer. This is why this is so fascinating to me, because I can't even keep track of Kennedy's priorities, but I think at the heart of it, why people are feeling disillusioned is once again because we put corporate interests above people's health, and that doesn't know any political party. We've seen both sides of the aisle do that time and time again. So how does this contribute further to the distrust and the mistrust of the medical community and to really the corporate healthcare community?
Yeah, so I see a lot of parallels between this and what has already happened in medicine. So I guess to me, this wasn't very surprising because the playbook has already been written. And we've seen major support of corporate, private equity we've talked about on the show before, right? So we've seen money over health many a time, which led to distrust in healthcare, which led to distrust in public health and the CDC, et cetera. And now we're seeing this again. I kind of wonder if RFK Jr. feels betrayed. Where's he on this?
Right. And where is his loyalties? Because apparently he took some of the MAHA people backstage, quote unquote, like a hidden meeting, according to The Hill, and they had some sort of closed door conversation trying to, I guess, assuage their concerns. But I mean, the proof is in the pudding, Dr. G. And this is why I always tell people when we're talking about politicians, first of all, you shouldn't be worshiping anybody, right? We should be thinking about aspirational ideals. That's what we should be. I don't even like the word worship, but that's what we should look to as our guiding star, our principles, not people. People are fallible. We will disappoint you because we're human. But when you're looking at these guys, I don't take much of what they say to heart. I very much more look at the policies they've put in place. And he can stand there and say, we're going to eat real food. We're going to take care of our women. We're going to take care of our children. But it's not aligning with the policies that he's supporting and what he's backing. And so to me, that's really the crux of all of this is they're saying they want to support the masses in healthcare. But like you had sent me this article this morning that millions of people now have lost Obamacare coverage, which is Medicaid, Medicare, support. So how do you sort of, what's the word for it? How do you align those two in your mind when they're just so diametrically opposed?
Yeah. So like you said, they're talking out of two sides of their mouths. So I don't think we should ever be surprised when politicians are going to say something that will pat you on the head and make you feel better for a little bit. The proof is in the pudding. And time and again now, we are seeing that the pudding ain't so good when it comes to actual health outcomes.
That's right.
And I frankly find this scary because this could be the tip of the iceberg with regard to, environmental protections and if we're so worried about toxins, MAHA, I completely understand here why you're upset.
Yeah.
Because I think the other thing, Natalie, is there's this let's call it vibe, to use a common word right now. But this vibe that MAHA is this conservative movement, period. Most of us want to make America healthy, right? Most of us agree on a lot of things, and that Venn diagram probably overlaps more than we think. I take a problem with the word again because when was it healthy before? So I don't know what we're trying to get back to, but I think we need to make some movements forward. And I think a lot of us agree that we need to be healthier as a country. And this, like you said, this shouldn't even be a political issue. This should be a very straightforward, is this impacting human lives? Then we should know how it's going to impact human lives. And just because you're Monsanto and have a boatload of money, I don't think that should give you special protections.
Well, and I think that's the words you're just saying right there, the special protections. This goes all the way back to about 20 some years ago now when they passed Citizens United. And a bunch of us said back then, this is going to cause a problem because this means that corporations basically are like people and can act that way. And so now here we are all these years later with all this dark money, all these super PACs, and many of them promoting and supporting candidates and people in positions of power to do their bidding. Because to your point, when we say make America healthy again, I think of like my grandmother's generation, because I think that's where a lot of people go, right? The 1940s and 50s, this golden era. My grandmother, she worked at the Nabisco factory here in Pittsburgh in the east end of the city. And she was a secretary before she got married. And she would take the trolley from her house to Nabisco, which was not a far trolley trip. She would bring 2 blouses because by the time she got off the train car, her blouse was black from the soot in the air. So once again, this idea that the environment is somehow not attached to our health is absurd. And this idea that things were better yesteryear is absurd. Things got better when we started intervening as a community and saying, hey, these companies, they need to control what they're putting in the air, in the water, in our soil. And we've regressed. And so like you said, there's this psychological thing that happens when we talk about yesterday, this nostalgia, this rose-colored glasses. But really, we want to make America healthier than it's ever been because we know more than we've ever known. And I think that happens to be a little bit of this juxtaposition of our cognitive dissonance and all of this. But speaking of sort of making our communities healthier, I think we often think of patient health,
Yes.
but we don't often think of the people providing the healthcare and how they're being impacted by policies, by burnout, by this mistrust and distrust machine. So what's been going on here in Pittsburgh that I think is emblematic of what's happening around the nation?
Yeah, we need to talk about some violence against healthcare workers that we've seen actually just very recently here in Pittsburgh. And in fact, part of a bigger concern where healthcare workers are afraid to go to work.
Yeah.
So this violence against healthcare workers is continuing to make headlines. Most recently, UPMC Magee Women's Hospital, which is, if you're from Pittsburgh, you're familiar with it, right down the road in Oakland. At least 3 nurses were injured after an ICU patient allegedly became violent, leaving 1 employee still unable to work. And the incident is in this broader picture of concerns over workplace violence in hospitals. So an exclusive survey found that 93% of Pennsylvania healthcare workers say they are afraid of being attacked on the job. So we need to talk about this because this seems to be a trend. Like, what are we doing to protect healthcare workers? Because there is not going to be healthcare if we don't have people working. And this violence, I really have this question, Natalie, where is it coming from? This drive for violence toward healthcare workers, where are you thinking? Like, I can speak to my experience as a physician, but I'm curious what you think.
I really think that this is an emblematic symptom of the much larger problem of a couple of things. One, we've completely lost trust in our journalists. And so what is happening here to me is, where are people getting their news source from? Where are they picking up their understanding of what's going on in the world? They're getting a lot of it from very extreme spaces on social media and on YouTube that are reinforcing this sort of siloed energy around how big pharma, big health care, they're out to get you. They're the bad guy, right? So you've got that. And then you mix that with what we were just touching on. This is from ABC News. Millions drop Obamacare coverage after subsidies expire. So now you've got all these people, 3 million more people in the United States had health care plans under the Affordable Care Act in February of last year compared to now. So you're looking at, we don't have access to healthcare, so we're not interacting with our PCPs.
Yeah.
We're not interacting with basic healthcare providers, mixed with more and more anger, distrust. They're the ones that are the problem. You know, drink this raw milk. This will save you, but please don't do that, by the way. And then, but don't trust your PCP. So then people wait till they actually are in desperate need for care. They're angry. They're scared. They get in front of a healthcare provider who can spend less and less time with them. They're frustrated. They have no one advocating for them, and it erupts. I mean, my mom saw this, Dr. G, time and again when she was a nurse, and she said this was getting worse and worse as she was working in the healthcare system. She was attacked by patients. You know, I could tell you so many stories of things that happened to my mom, just my mom, but all the stories that she had about other people. And I think it's built on itself because of this divide we have. What are your thoughts coming from a physician perspective?
Yeah, I think tensions are very high. I was just having this conversation last night with some family members. And these family members are in the healthcare world. All right. So they already work in healthcare for many, many, many decades at this point. And they were talking about their experiences of being on the patient side. So having a family member in the hospital, they felt like that family member was not being treated well. They felt like there was not communication. They felt that they were rushed through the process and that there wasn't a clear plan of action. So I think when tensions are already high and you add on to that distrust in healthcare, and then you add on to that the current standard of care in the hospitals right now, which is not the fault of the healthcare workers, I should say, because the system has strained the healthcare workers to a point where it is not safe for them to work, not just because of workplace violence like this, but also safe for them to work from the amount of time that they're given to spend with patients, safe from a pay perspective, from the amount of time that they are working, how many hours, how many patients they're overloaded with. And so these burdens compile. And when these burdens and tensions compile, it should not be surprising to us then that violence is going to come from that.
Yeah. And I want to add, Joe, thank you for sharing your comment, because this is a very good point. Hostility towards legal immigrant nurses and caretakers, there's prejudice there too.
Yes.
Correct. And once again, like we were talking, yes, thank you for that, because that feeds back into these dangerous narratives that we're hearing, this level of distrust within our communities. So when we look at all of this, Dr. G, from your perspective, because you work somewhat outside the system, and I say somewhat because, yes, you don't bill insurance, but you still have to deal with insurance companies. You still have to deal with the systems that be, even as a direct primary care provider. What do you see as a way forward here? If we want to make America healthy, not again, but truly healthy, that includes how we take care of the people giving and providing care in high stress circumstances, as well as how the patients are feeling that care is being provided in those circumstances.
So much of this is a trickle down effect. So I think I talk with a lot of colleagues who feel that the leadership in their departments in these academic centers, for example, these leaders are middlemen and women for higher ups who have no regard for talent, for patient outcomes, patient safety. It is all about money. Therefore, then these department chairs, for example, right, or the leaders then trickle down to those under them, those who are providing care, and treat them as such. You are a warm body who is a widget. You are a replaceable warm body, fill in the blank healthcare worker. And when you feel like you're treated like that over and over again, that takes the humanity out of care. That takes the humanity out of medicine, right? Not of experience in this job that you spent, Lord knows how much time and experience to get to in the first place, right? And education, et cetera. And so when that humanity is taken out, that leads to a condition called moral injury. Some people equate that with burnout, but it's a little different. With moral injury, we have this, our values are not aligned with what we're actually doing or being told to do. And that creates this very unstable space that then can trickle into how we treat patients and how that, and it's a give and take. We're human beings. That relationship, those conversations or lack thereof can lead to problems, right? So we've got to rebuild from the top down as well. And starting with that top down impact of stopping that trickle down effect of negative treatment of people that are out there doing the hard work every day.
And I think that really comes with a whole new philosophy of people over profits, which is a very, it's a very confrontational statement to make these days around this when you're looking at it from a corporatist perspective, right? And what's fascinating about all of this, you guys, is it impedes process and progress. We can't further our system of values where patients do better, have better outcomes because the providers, and meaning the healthcare workers, are feeling supported and able to do their job. And so we're missing huge swaths of research and development of new things that could carry us into the future as a leader in healthcare. And I think on top of everything that you've said, this administration has cut so much funding, has cut so much support, so much research support, that we're really seeing the regression. So you have all of these things happening in tandem, and it's no wonder that people feel the way that they do. And I think a really fascinating angle to this is our third topic today, because for decades, scientists believed that once menopause begins, which is an area of study that has been completely under-researched and under-resourced, the ovaries essentially retire. This is their words in Science magazine, becoming little more than dormant organs with no real purpose. But new research is turning that assumption on its head. I found this so fascinating. A study from Northwestern University, this was cool because they accidentally discovered this. They weren't looking for this, which is so typical with medicine, right? You're dealing with one thing, you find something else. This is suggesting that postmenopausal ovaries may take on an entirely new role, interacting with the immune system in ways that scientists are only beginning to understand. So it could reshape how we're thinking about menopause, aging, and inflammation. Because once again, while scientists don't know yet whether postmenopausal ovaries are actively sending immune signals through the body because they're noticing immune cells are kind of clustering there, or at least they're finding this, the findings could explain why women might experience chronic inflammation or other health issues that they thought were related to just our hormones.
Yeah.
But now they're like, this could be related to the actual cells that are going to the ovaries. And once again, this was totally unintentional findings. They were working on something else and then they discovered this, which is why I love science. But from your perspective, obviously this is a new study. We have to wait for more research to be done. But once again, this to me showcases why it is so important to be paying attention to medical research, and in particular, women's medical research in a way that hasn't been in the past. What did you think of this?
I think it's exciting. I can think of many instances in my day-to-day practice where I use a certain medication or manage a certain issue with a modality that wasn't initially tended to do that. Okay. Like a medication that was initially an antidepressant and it turns out it was great for X, Y, and Z. And so now we use it for that. And that's just one example. And so these incidental findings of, what could be going on in the body or what pharmaceutical things, it's fascinating. And that's the scientific process. And I think one thing that has been concerning for me in the past year and a half is the lack of respect for the scientific process, right? Like we're seeing not only funding cut back, but the discussions around the scientific process and research in general is being dismantled in some ways. Recently there's been discussion about who says that studies are actually good studies and studies that we should be paying attention to. And more it seems like it's RFK Jr. I think we need
who
to
is not a
understand.
Scientist.
Right, who's not a scientist. I think it's important for us to take these types of examples where we see science doing what science is supposed to do, investigating, asking new questions, seeing signals and going from there and chasing those signals, right, to learn about them. And extrapolate that to all that can be found with all of the brilliant intelligence that we have out there in the scientific community and embrace that, because especially in fields like women's health, where we're seeing so much now come out, that is only going to help us. And when we're revisiting old things that have already been determined and that have very clear backing, vaccine efficacy being one of them and vaccine safety being one of them, but we're missing out on potential opportunities like this and others, that's where we're going to go backwards.
Yeah. And I think that's what really upsets me about all of this. I was reading an unrelated study today earlier around the COVID vaccine and these boosters and how now they're realizing there's all these great anti-cancer properties that are happening, like when you've gotten a booster shot, what it's igniting in the body and how it's actually supporting things in a way that they didn't know. And so now they're like, okay, this is an mRNA vaccine. How do we learn from this? How do we build on this? And so this idea too, once again, about this distrust in the medical community and what people are missing out on. And to your point, too, we can't study something we're not allowed to speak about. And the fact that this administration doesn't want to give grants if you use the word woman in them, or, literally menopause, like the actual words, the actual semantics, language matters, right? So I think it's a real pickle that we're in, because I want the United States to be a leader in world health. I want people to want to come here and study. We have some of the best research facilities in the entire world right in our own backyard. We've been advancing, medical science for decades upon decades. And the idea that could stop because of political ideology, it should make everyone sad and angry, because we can do so much more for our kids. We could make this country healthy. We could make the world healthier if we would, just like you said, allow science to do its thing and follow the process and recognize it ain't black and white. And it's not as easy to say this is a yes and this is a no. And sometimes, like in this case, it's surprising. This wasn't what was anticipated when this person was working on these cells and was like, wait, I was looking at this supposing they were dormant because these were the only cells. That was the other thing. The reason they used postmenopausal women was because this was the tissue and the organs that they had access to. So it was a true accident, which I just think is so Cool. And what can happen when we just say, why not? Let's look.
And be okay with being wrong. I think that's a huge part of science, that people think they see it as a failure, or they see it as not worthwhile. But being wrong in science, for any of you out there listening who have done research, who have been in a lab, who have worked through that, I remember that vividly. Being wrong actually teaches you a ton.
Oh my gosh. A lot of people don't know this, you guys, but I was a biology major in college and I worked in many labs. And I remember Dr. Schwaka, I'll never forget this, at Pitt. And I was working on the cell cycle, like the division of cells in meiosis. And I said to Dr. Schwaka, this isn't working. Like, my Petri dish is broken. And he goes, your Petri dish isn't broken. He's like, now we just know there are 500 ways that didn't work. So try 501. And I was like, and it made me realize, like, oh, this is a true, we're trying and we're trying again. And we're going to tweak and we try and we tweak and we try. And I don't think people, if you have never had that experience in a lab, you don't, realize how tedious it is, how long you have to wait for an answer, sometimes 6-8 weeks for these little dishes to do the little things they're supposed to. And when they don't, you're like, was this human error? Or is this the way it's put? And I find that process really fascinating, Dr. G. And I'm glad that we have the ability to understand that process. And I think that's what's so important in terms of a takeaway from these segments, is people understanding that science is real and it matters and it's a practice. It's not perfection, right? There's no absolute. In fact, I mean, you've seen there have been things that have been sort of the way they were until new discoveries emerged. And then we go, okay, everything we thought about that, we're going to try this now because this is better, right? Exactly. I just think that's valuable on every level. As we wrap up, you've got a lot going on and a lot cooking in your world. But why do you stay so committed to this work? Because as a physician who is, you're self-employed, you own your own company as a direct primary care doc, a lot of people are leaving the medical industry because of burnout, the issues, the moral injury. What keeps you committed to doing this? Because it's a lot.
It is a lot. I was actually feeling it today. It's funny you asked that. I think being tied to, so back to moral injury, where you feel like the values don't align.
Yeah.
All of this aligns with my values. So advocacy in support of healthcare workers, in support of patients, aligns with my values. Doing, medical practice in the direct primary care model, as opposed to within the system, that allows me to have more time with patients and access and that tailored relationship, that aligns with my values. And maintaining that value alignment is sustainable, because it's always going to be up and down, right? And there's going to be days where I say, like, F it. I can't do this. It's too much pressure, liability. I'm scared, whatever. And then you get back to it and you say, this aligns with my values though. And I can't stop. It's a passion. So thank you for recognizing that, because it is, it's a conversation I have with myself regularly, and I don't see it in some of my colleagues. I don't see that value alignment, and that has to be scary. That has to be scary, to go through this much time and experience and training and not have that.
It's interesting because obviously we're not in the same industry, but I always say what's happening in public health is what's happening with journalism. And it's the same thing where sometimes you're just like, I don't know why I'm doing this. But then you think to yourself, but I can't stop because this is where my values align with the public interest. And I think I understand that, even though it's not the same.
And I hear from a lot of both colleagues and patients, so both sides of the relationship, who say to me, thank you for being a voice, because we don't have one. My colleagues that are employed in the big system aren't allowed to talk freely, a lot of them, right? So I want to be a voice, even if it's a small voice who doesn't make a big impact, even if it's in a small corner of the world, at least I'm trying. And the same thing for patient care.
Absolutely. And you are making an impact, because we always have people that respond to this show. We always have people that are commenting and sending us thoughts about what you're doing. And you're seeing it in your own work as well, and in the communities here around Western Pennsylvania. So we thank you for being that voice of reason in an insane world. It's nice to feel a little sane once in a while. Dr. G, if people want to follow your work and learn more about what you're putting out there around the topics of public health, where can they go?
I'm very active at Natalie Gentile, MD. That is my Instagram, my Substack, YouTube, TikTok. And then I'm also here on Substack, specifically up there. You can subscribe. I have a website, nataliegentilemd.com.
Thank you so much. And, I couldn't agree more with you on everything that you shared today. And also, that's why with Facts Over Fear, I continue to have public health professionals like yourself and other researchers and people in different positions in public health join me on this show, because we have to fight back against the disinformation machine and build up that trust. Because at the end of the day, I truly believe medicine is a calling, just like journalism is a calling. And if you're here, at one point, there was a little part of you, even if you feel that moral injury, there was a reason you were doing this work. And so we got to tap back into that collective sense of humanity so that we can make this country a better place for the many and not just the privileged few. Thank you again to everybody that joined and for all of your comments. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them, but you can watch this back later. Please subscribe. And until next time, as always, everyone, please take care of yourselves and each other. Thanks again, Dr. G. Bye.
Thank you.